Hi, my name is Michelle Kennedy, and this is Backspace. As a writer, I wanted to be Ernest Hemingway more than anything as a teenager, person of my young 20s, until I realized that what I really wanted to be was David Sedaris. Hemingway, clearly one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. He has been the subject now of documentaries, biographies, all kinds of tributes and not. According to biography, his outsized personality and macho swagger made him a star beyond the printed pages. Behind the facade, however, Hemingway faced a lifelong battle against depression, alcoholism, and mental health issues, all of which contributed to his death by suicide in July of 1961. But it wasn't just Hemingway who suffered, as several generations of his family confronted similar issues in what one of his granddaughters called the Hemingway curse. He was the second child of Clarence Hemingway and his wife Grace. Ed was a doctor, Grace was a singer and a music teacher, and much of his childhood was split between Oak Park, Illinois, and a house in the woods of Michigan, where he learned to love hunting and the outdoors. But his father was reported to be a violent, domineering bully, and having once been married to a violent, domineering bully, I understand how that can affect your mental health. And he was a child, so a lot of that makes a lot of sense, especially at a time when talking about those things, or everybody had a violent, domineering father, and so a lot of men had troubles throughout their lives because of it. He also had a relationship with his mother that was difficult. His mother dressed him like a girl when he was a child. Hemingway's third wife, Martha Gellhorn, would later call Hemingway's difficulties with women, including his cheating, his cruelty, his abandonment, to his relationship with his mother. As Gellhorn wrote years later, deep in earnest, due to his mother, going back to the indestructible first memories of childhood, was a mistrust and fear of women. He was a prodigious drinker. He was repeatedly jealous, mistrusting, competitive, and reportedly had a moodiness that is actually kind of reflected in the essay we're reading today. The Art of the Short Story is not a published essay. It is Ernest taking on the position of lecturer in writing, but as if he was speaking it out loud. It was written about 2 years before he died of suicide, and it is an interesting look at not only the way he thinks and writes, but the way he thinks about what he writes. I think it's fun anyway, and I hope you enjoy it. Here is The Art of the Short Story by Ernest Hemingway. In March 1959, Ernest Hemingway's publisher, Charles Scribner Jr., suggested putting together a student's edition of Hemingway short stories. He listed the 12 stories which were most in demand for anthologies, but thought that the collection could include Hemingway's favorites and that Hemingway could write a preface for classroom use. Hemingway responded favorably. He would write the preface in the form of a lecture on the art of the short story. Hemingway wrote the preface as if it were an extemporaneous oral presentation before a class on the methods of short story writing. It is similar to a transcript of an informal talk. Judging it against literary standards or using it to assess Hemingway's literary capabilities would elevate it beyond this level and would be inappropriate. Both Hemingway's wife and his publisher were against its publication, and in the end, Hemingway agreed. Hemingway relates the circumstances under which he wrote the short stories. He gives opinion on other writers, critics, and on his own works. He expresses views on the art of the short story. The essay is published unedited except for some spelling corrections, a holographic manuscript, 2 typescripts, and an addendum written for other possible selections for the book are in the Hemingway collection at the John F. Kennedy Library. Here is The Art of the Short Story by Ernest Hemingway. Gertrude Stein, who is sometimes very wise, said to me on one of her wise days, "Remember, Hemingway, that remarks are not literature." The following remarks are not intended to be, nor do they pretend to be, literature. They are meant to be instructive, irritating, and informative. No writer should be asked to write solemnly about what he has written. Truthfully, yes. Solemnly, no. Should we begin in the form of a lecture designed to counteract the many lectures you will have heard on the art of the short story? Many people have a compulsion to write. There is no law against it, and doing it makes them happy while they do it, and presumably relieves them. Given editors who will remove the worst of their emissions, supply them with spelling and syntax, and help them shape their thoughts and their beliefs, some compulsory writers attain a temporary fame. But when shit or merity, a word which teacher will explain, is cut out of a book, the odor of it always remains perceptible to anyone with sufficient olfactory sensibility. The compulsory writer would be advised not to attempt the short story. Should he make the attempt, he might well suffer the fate of the compulsive architect, which is as lonely an end as that of the compulsive bassoon player. Let us not waste our time considering the sad and lonely ends of these unfortunate creatures, gentlemen. Let us continue the exercise. Are there any questions? Have you mastered the art of the short story? Have I been helpful, or have I not made myself clear? I hope so. Gentlemen, I will be frank with you. The masters of the short story come to no good end. You query this, you cite me, Mom. Longevity, gentlemen, is not an end, it is a prolongation. I cannot say fie upon it, since I have never fied on anything yet. Shuck it off, Jack. Don't fie on it. Should we abandon rhetoric and realize at the same time that what is the most authentic hipster talk of today is the 23 skidoo of tomorrow? We should. What intelligent young people you are, and what a privilege it is to be with you. Do I hear a request for authentic ballroom bananas? I do. Gentlemen, we have them for you in bunches. Actually, as writers put it, when they do not know how to begin a sentence, there is very little to say about writing short stories unless you are a professional explainer. If you can do it, you don't have to explain it. If you cannot do it, no explanation will ever help. A few things I have found to be true. If you leave out important things or events that you know about, the story is strengthened. If you leave or skip something because you do not know it, the story will be worthless. The test of any story is how very good the stuff is that you, not your editors, omit. A story in this book called Big Two-Hearted River is about a boy coming home, beat to the wide from a war. Beat to the wide was an earlier and possibly more severe form of beat, since those who had it were unable to comment on this condition and could not suffer that it be mentioned in their presence. So the war, all mention of the war, anything about the war, is omitted. The river was the Fox River by Saney, Michigan, not the Big Two-Hearted. The change of name was made purposely, not from ignorance nor carelessness, but because Big Two-Hearted River is poetry, and because there were many Indians in the story, just as the war was in the story, and none of the Indians nor the war appeared. As you see, it is very simple and easy to explain. In a story called A Sea Change, everything is left out. I had seen the couple in the Bar Basque in Saint Jean de Luz, and I knew the story too well, which is the squared root of well, and use any well you like, except mine. So I left the story out, but it is all there. It is not visible, but it is there. It is very hard to talk about your work, since it implies arrogance or pride. I have tried to get rid of arrogance and replace it with humility, and I do all right at that sometimes. But without pride, I would not wish to continue to live nor to write, and I publish nothing of which I am not proud. You can take that any way you like. Jack, I might not take it myself, but maybe we're built different. Another story is 50 Grand. This story originally started like this. How do you handle Benny so easy, Jack? Soldier asked him. Benny's an awful smart boxer. Jack said, all the time he's in there, he's thinking. All the time he's thinking, I was hitting him. I told this story to Scott Fitzgerald in Paris before I wrote 50 Grand, trying to explain to him how a truly great boxer like Jack Britton functioned. I wrote the story opening with that incident, and when it was finished, I was happy about it and showed it to Scott. He said he liked the story very much and spoke about it in so fulsome a manner that I was embarrassed. Then he said, there is only one thing wrong with it, Ernest, and I'll tell you this as your friend. You have to cut that old chestnut about Britton and Leonard. At that time, my humility was in such ascendance that I thought he must have heard the remark before, or that Britton must have said it to someone else. It was not until I had published the story, from which I had removed that lovely revelation of the metaphysics of boxing, that Fitzgerald, in the way his mind was functioning that year, so that he called an historic statement an old chestnut because he had heard it once, and only once, from a friend, that I realized how dangerous that attractive virtue, humility, can be. So do not be too humble, gentlemen. Be humble after, but not during the action. They will all con you, gentlemen, but sometimes it is not intentional. Sometimes they simply do not know. This is the saddest state of writers, and the one you will most frequently encounter. If there are no questions, let us press on. My loyal and devoted friend Fitzgerald, who was truly more interested in my own career at this point than in his own, sent me to Scribner's with the story. It had already been turned down by Ray Long of Cosmopolitan magazine because it had no love interest. That was okay with me since I eliminated any love interest, and there were, purposely, no women in it except for 2 broads. Enter 2 broads, as in Shakespeare, and they go out of the story. This is unlike what you will hear from your instructors, that if a broad comes into a story in the first paragraph, she must reappear later to justify her original presence. This is untrue, gentlemen. You may dispense with her, just as in life. It is also untrue that if a gun hangs on the wall when you open up the story, it must be fired by page 14. The chances are, gentlemen, that if it hangs upon the wall, it will not even shoot. If there are no questions, shall we press on? Yes, the unfireable gun may be a symbol. That is true. But with a good enough writer, the chances are some jerk just hung it there to look at. Gentlemen, you can't be sure. Maybe he is queer for guns, or maybe an interior decorator put it there, or both. So with pressure by Max Perkins on the editor, Scribner's Magazine agreed to publish the story and pay me $250 if I would cut it to a length where it would not have to be continued into the back of the book. They all call magazines books. There is significance in this, but we will not go into it. They are not books, even if they put them in stiff covers. You have to watch this, gentlemen. Anyway, I explained, without heat nor hope, seeing the built-in stupidity of the editor of the magazine and his intransigence, that I had already cut the story myself, and that the only way it could be shortened by 500 words and make sense was to amputate the first 500. I had often done that with myself with stories, and it improved them. It would not have improved this story, but I thought that was their ass, not mine. I would put it back together in a book. They read differently in a book anyway. You will learn about this. No, gentlemen, they would not cut the first 500 words. They gave it instead to a very intelligent young assistant editor who assured me he would cut it with no difficulty. That was just what he did on his first attempt, and any place he took words out, the story no longer made sense. It had been cut for keeps when I wrote it, and afterwards, at Scott's request, I'd even cut out the metaphysics which ordinarily I leave in. So they quit on it, finally, and eventually. I understand. Edward Weeks got Ellery Sedgwick to publish it in the Atlantic Monthly. Then everyone, wanted me to write fight stories, and I did not write any more fight stories because I tried to write only one story on anything if I got what I was after, because life is very short if you like it, and I knew that even then. There are other things to write about and other people who write very good fight stories. I recommend you to The Professional by W.C. Hines. Yes, the confidently cutting young editor became a big man on Reader's Digest. Or didn't he? I'll have to check that. So you see, gentlemen, you never know. And what you win in Boston, you lose in Chicago. That's symbolism, gentlemen, and you can run a saliva test on it. That is how we now detect symbolism in our group, and so far it gives fairly satisfactory results. Not complete, mind you, but we are getting in to see our way through. Incidentally, within a short time, Scribner's Magazine was running a contest for long short stories that broke back into the back of the book, and paying many times $250 to the winners. Now, since I have answered your perceptive questions, let us take up another story. This story is called The Light of the World. I could have called it Behold, I Stand at the Door and Knock, or some other stained glass window title, but I did not think of it, and actually The Light of the World is better. It is about many things, and you would be ill-advised to think it is a simple tale. It is really, no matter what you hear, a love letter to a whore named Alice, who at the time of the story would have dressed out at around 210 pounds, maybe more. And the point of that is that nobody, and that goes for you, Jack, knows how we were then from how we are now. This is worse on women than on us, until you look into the mirror yourself someday, instead of looking at women all the time. And in writing the story, I was trying to do something about it. But there are very few basic things you can do anything about, so I do what the French call constater. Look that up. That is what you have to learn to do, and you ought to learn French anyway if you are going to understand short stories, and there is nothing rougher than to do it all the way. It is hardest to do about women, and you must not worry when they say there are no such women as those you wrote about. That only means your women aren't like their women. You ever seen any of their women, Jack? I have a couple times, and you would be appalled, and I know you don't appall easily. What I learned constructive about women, not just ethics, like never blame them if they pox you, because somebody pox them, and lots of times they don't even know they have it. That's in the first reader for Squares, is, no matter how they get, always think of them the way they were on the best day they ever had in their lives. That's about all you can do about it, and that is what I was trying for in the story. Now, there is another story called The Short Happy Life of Frances Makehomer. Jack, I get a bang even yet from just writing the titles. That's why you write, no matter what they tell you. I'm glad to be with somebody I know now, and those feeking students have gone. They haven't? Okay. Glad to have them with us. It is in you that our hope is. That's to stuff the feed the troops. Students at ease. This is a simple story in a way, because the woman who I knew very well in real life, but then invented out of it to make the woman for the story, is a bitch for the full course and doesn't change. You'll probably never meet the type because you haven't got the money. I haven't either, but I get around. Now this woman doesn't change. She has been better, but she will never be any better anymore. I invented her complete with handles from the worst bitch I knew then. And when I first knew her, she'd been lovely. Not my dish, not my pigeon, not my cup of tea, but lovely for what she was, and I was her all of the above, which is whatever you make of it. This is as close as I can put it and keep it clean. This information is what you call the background of a story. You throw it all away and invent from what you know. I should have said that sooner. That's all there is to writing. That a perfect ear, call it selective, absolute pitch, the devotion to your work and respect for it that a priest of God has for his, and then have the guts of a burglar, no conscience except to writing, and you're in, gentlemen. It's easy. Anybody can write if he is cut out for it and applies himself. Never give it a thought. Just have those few requisites. I mean, the way you have to write now to handle the way now is now. There was a time when it was nicer, much nicer, and all that has been well written by nicer people. They are all dead, and so are their times, but they handled them very well. Those times are over, and writing like that won't help you now. But to return to this story, The woman called Margot Maycomer is no good to anybody now except for trouble. You can bang her, but that's about all. The man is a nice jerk. I knew him very well in real life, so invent him too from everything I know. So he is just how he really was, only he is invented. The white hunter is my best friend, and he does not care what I write as long as it is readable. So I don't invent him at all. I just disguise him for family and business reasons and to keep him out of trouble with the game department. He is the furthest thing from a square since they invented the circle. So I just have to take care of him with an adequate disguise, and he is as proud as though we both wrote it, which actually you always do in anything if you go back far enough. So it is a secret between us. That's all there is to that story, except maybe the lion when he is hit, and I'm thinking inside of him really, not faked. I can think inside of a lion, really. It's hard to believe, and it is perfectly okay with me if you don't believe it. Perfectly. Plenty of people have used it since, though, and one boy used it quite well, making only one mistake. Making any mistake kills you. This mistake killed him, and quite soon everything he wrote was a mistake. You have to watch yourself, Jack, every minute, and the more talented you are, the more you have to watch these mistakes, because you will be in faster company. A writer who is not going all the way up can make all the mistakes he wants. None of it matters. He doesn't matter. The people who like him don't matter either. Could drop dead. It wouldn't make any difference. It's too bad. As soon as you read one page by anyone, you can tell whether it matters or not. This is sad, and you hate to do it. I don't want to be the one that tells them. So don't make any mistakes. You see how easy it is? Just go right in there and be a writer. That about handles that story. Any questions? No. I don't know whether she shot him on purpose any more than you do. I could find out if I asked myself because I invented it. And I could go right on inventing, but you have to know where to stop. That is what makes a short story. Makes it short, at least. The only hint I could give you is that it is my belief that the incidence of husbands shot accidentally by wives who are bitches and really work at it is very low. Should we continue? If you are interested in how you get the idea for a story, this is how it was with the snows of Kilimanjaro. They have you ticketed and always try to make it that you are someone who can only write about theirself. I am using in this lecture the spoken language, which varies. It is one of the ways to write, so you might as well follow it, and maybe you will learn something. Anyone who can write spoken, pedantic, inexorably dull, or pure English prose, just as slot machines can be set for straight percentage giveaway or stealing. No one who can write spoken ever starves, except at the start. The others you can eat irregularly on, but any good writer can do them all. This is spoken, approved for over 14, I hope. Thank you. Anyway, we came home from Africa, which is a place you stay until the money runs out or you get smacked. 1 year, and at quarantine I said to the ship news reporters when somebody asked me what my projects were that I was going to work and when I had some more money to go back to Africa. The different wars killed off that project, and it took 19 years to get back. Well, it was in the papers, and a really nice and really fine and really rich woman invited me to tea, and we had a few drinks as well, and she had read in the papers about this project. And why should I have to go back for any lack of money? She and my wife and I could go to Africa any time, and money was only something to be used intelligently for the best enjoyment of good people, and so forth. It was a sincere and fine and good offer, and I liked her very much, and I turned down the offer. So I get down to Key West, and I start to think what would happen to a character like me, whose defects I know, if I had accepted that offer. So I start to invent, and I make myself a guy who would do what I invent. I know about the dying part because I had been through all that. Not just once. I got it early, in the middle, and later. So I invent how someone I know who cannot sue me, that is me, would turn out, and put into one short story things you would use in, say, 4 novels if you were careful and not a spender. I throw everything I had been saving into the story and spend it all. I really throw it away, if you know what I mean. I'm not gambling with it. Maybe I am. Who knows? Real gamblers don't gamble. At least you think they don't gamble. They gamble, Jack, don't worry. So I make up the man and the woman as well as I can, and I put all the true stuff in with all the load, the most load any short story ever carried. It still takes off and it flies. This makes me very happy. So I thought that, and the May Comer story are as good short stories as I can write for a while. So I lose interest and take up other forms of writing. Any questions? The leopard? He is part of the metaphysics. I did not hire out to explain that, nor a lot of other things. I know, but I am under no obligation to tell you. Put it down to omerta. Look that word up. I dislike explainers, apologists, stoolies, pimps. No writer should be any one of those for his own work. This is just a little background, Jack, that won't do either of us any harm. You see the point, don't you? If not, it is too bad. That doesn't mean you shouldn't explain for, apologize for, or pimp or tout for some other writer. I have done it, and the best luck I had was doing it for Faulkner. When they didn't know him in Europe, I told them all how he was the best we had and so forth. And I over-humbled him with plenty and built him up about as high as he could go, because he never had a break then and he was good then. So now whenever he has a few shots, he'll tell students what's wrong with me or tell Japanese or anybody they send him to build up our local product. I get tired of this, but I figure what the hell, he's had a few shots and maybe he even believes it. So you asked me just now what I thought about him, as everybody does, and I always stall. So I say, you know how good he is. Right, you ought to. What is wrong is he cons himself sometimes pretty bad. That may just be the sauce, but for quite a while, when he hits the sauce toward the end of a book, it shows bad. He gets tired, and he goes on, and that sauce writing is really hard on who has to read it. I mean, if they care about writing. I thought maybe it would help if I read it using the sauce myself, but it wasn't any help. Maybe it would have helped if I was 14, but I was only 14 one year, and then I would have been too busy. So that's what I think about Faulkner. You ask that I sum it up from a standpoint of a professional. Very good writer. Cons himself now. Too much sauce. But he wrote a really fine story called The Bear, and I would be glad to put it in this book for your pleasure and delight if I had written it. But you can't write them all, Jack. It would be simpler and more fun to talk about other writers and what is good and what is wrong with them, as I saw when you asked me about Faulkner. He's easy to handle because he talks so much for a supposed silent man. Never talk, Jack, if you are a writer, unless you have the guy write it down and have you go over it. Otherwise, they get it wrong. That's what you think until they play a tape back at you. Then you know how silly it sounds. You're a writer, aren't you? Okay, shut up and write. What was that question? Did I really write 3 stories in one day in Madrid, the way it said in the interview in the Paris Review and Horizon? Yes, sir. I was hotter than a let's skip it, gentlemen. I was laden with uninhibited energy. Or should we say this energy was canalized into my work? Such states are compounded by the brisk air of the Guadaramas. Jack, was it cold? The highly seasoned Bacalao Vizcaino? Ooh, Bacalao Vizcaino. Possibly. Dried codfish, Jack. A certain vague loneliness. I was in love and the girl was in Bologna, and I couldn't sleep anyway, so why not write? So I wrote. The stories you mention I wrote in one day in Madrid on May 16, when it snowed out the San Isidro bullfights. First I wrote The Killers, which I'd tried to write before and failed. Then after lunch I got in bed to keep warm and wrote Today is Friday. I had so much juice I thought maybe I was going crazy, and I had about 6 other stories to write. So I got dressed and walked to Fornos, the old bullfighters' cafe, and drank coffee, and then came back and wrote 10 Indians. This made me very sad, and I drank some brandy and went to sleep. I'd forgotten to eat, and one of the waiters brought me up some bacalao and a small steak and fried potatoes and a bottle of Valdepeñas. The woman who ran the pension was always worried that I did not eat enough, and she had sent the waiter. I remember sitting up in bed and eating and drink the Valdepeñas. The waiter said he would bring up another bottle. He said the senora wanted to know if I was going to write all night. I said no. I thought I would lay off for a while. Why don't you try to write just one more? The waiter asked. I'm only supposed to write 1, I said. Nonsense, he said. You could write 6. I'll try tomorrow, I said. Try it tonight, he said. What do you think the old woman sent the food up for? I'm tired, I told him. Nonsense, he said. The word was not nonsense. You tired after 3 miserable little stories. Translate me one. Leave me alone, I said. How am I going to write if you don't leave me alone? So I sat up in bed and I drank the Valdepenas and thought what a hell of a writer I was if the first story was as good as I'd hoped. I have used the same words in answering that the excellent Plimpton elicited from me in order to avoid error or repetition. If there are no more questions, should we continue? It is very bad for writers to be hit on the head too much. Sometimes you lose months when you should have and perhaps would have worked well, but sometimes a long time after the memory of the sensory distortions of those woundings will produce a story which, while not justifying the temporary cerebral damage, will palliate it. A Way You'll Never Be was written at Key West, Florida, some 15 years after the damage it depicts, both to a man, a village, and a countryside had occurred. No questions? I understand. I understand completely. However, do not be alarmed. We are not going to call for a moment of silence, nor for the man in the white suit, nor for the net. Now, gentlemen, and I notice a sprinkling of ladies who have drifted in, attracted, I hope, by the sprinkling of applause. Thank you. Just what stories do you yourselves care for? I must not impose on you exclusively those that find favor with their author. Do you, too, care for any of them? You like The Killers? So good of you. And why? Because it had Burt Lancaster and Ava Gardner in it? Excellent. Now we are getting somewhere. It is always a pleasure to remember Miss Gardner as she was then. No, I never met Lancaster. I can't tell you what he is really like, but everyone says he is terrific. The background of that story is that I had a lawyer who had cancer and he wanted cash rather than any long-term stuff. You can see his point, I hope. So when he was offered a share in the picture for me and less cash, he took the more cash. It turned out badly for us both. He died eventually, and I retained only an academic interest in the picture. But the company lets me run it off free when I want to see Miss Gardner and hear the shooting. It is a good picture, and the only good picture ever made of a story of mine. One of the reasons for that is that John Huston wrote the script. Yes, I know him. Is everything true about him that they say? No, but the best things are. Isn't that interesting? You mean background about the story, not the picture. That's very sporting, young lady. Didn't you see the class was enjoying itself finally? Besides, it has a sordid background. I hesitate to bring it in, on account of there is no statute of limitations on what it deals with. Gene Tierney, who is a man of wide culture, once asked me, Ernest, wasn't that Andre Anderson in The Killers? I told it was, and that the town was Summit, Illinois, not Summit, New Jersey. We left it at that. I thought about that story a long, long time before I invented it, and I had to be as far away as Madrid before I invented it properly. That story probably had more left out of it than anything I ever wrote. More even than when I left the war out of the big two-hearted river. I left out all of Chicago, which is hard to do in 2,951 words. Another time I was leaving out good was in a clean, well-lighted place. There, I really had luck. I left out everything. That is about as far as you can go. So I stood on that one and haven't drawn to that since. I trust you follow me, gentlemen. As I said at the start, there is nothing to writing short stories, once you get the knack of it. A story I can beat, and I promise you I will, is The Undefeated. But I leave it in to show you the difference between when you leave it all in and when you take it out. The stories where you leave it all in do not reread like the stories where you leave it out. They understand easier, but when you have read them once or twice, you can't reread them. I could give you examples in everybody who writes, but writers have enough enemies without doing it to each other. All really good writers know exactly what is wrong in all other good writers. There are no perfect writers unless they write just a very little bit and then stand on it. But writers have no business fingering another writer to outsiders while he is alive. After a writer is dead and doesn't have to work anymore, anything goes. A son of a bitch alive is a son of a bitch dead. I'm not talking about rows between writers. They are okay and can be comic. If someone puts a thumb in your eye, you don't protest. You thumb him back. He fouls you, you foul him back. That teaches people to keep it clean. What I mean is, you shouldn't give it to another writer. I mean, really give it to him. I know you shouldn't do it because I did it to Sherwood Anderson. I did it because I was righteous, which is the worst thing you can be. And I thought he was going to pot the way he was writing and that I could kid him out of it by showing him just how awful it was. So I wrote The Torrents of Spring. It was cruel to do, and it didn't do any good. And he just wrote worse and worse. What the hell business of mine was it if he wanted to write badly? None. But then I was righteous and more loyal to writing than to my friend. I should have shot anybody then, not kill them, just shoot them a little, if I thought it would straighten them up and make them right. Now, I know that there's nothing you can do about any writer ever. The seeds of their destruction are in them from the start. And the thing to do about writers is get along with them if you see them and try not to see them. All except a very few, and all of them except a couple, are dead. Like I said, once they're dead, anything goes, as long as it's true. I'm sorry I threw at Anderson. It was cruel, and I was a son of a bitch to do it. The only thing I can say is that I was as cruel to myself then, but that is no excuse. He was a friend of mine, but that was no excuse for doing it to him. Any questions? Ask me that some other time. This brings us to another story, My Old Man. The background of this was all the time we spent at the races at San Siro when I used to be in hospital in Milan in 1918, and the time put in at the track in Paris when we really worked at it. Handicapping, I mean. Some people say that this story is derived from a story about harness racing by Sherwood Anderson called I'm a Fool. I do not believe this. My theory is that it is derived from a jockey I knew very well and a number of horses I knew, one of which I was in love with. I invented the boy in my story, and I think the boy in Sherwood's story was himself. If you read both stories, you can form your own opinion. Whatever it is all right with me. The best things Sherwood wrote are in 2 books, Winesburg, Ohio, and The Triumph of the Egg. You should read them both. Before you know too much about things, they are better. The best thing about Sherwood was he was the kind of guy at the start his name made you think of Sherwood Forest, while in Bob Sherwood, the name only made you think of a playwright. Any other stories you find in this book are in because I liked them. If you like them too, I will be pleased. Thank you very much. It has been nice to be with you. June 1959, La Consola, Churiana, Malaga, Spain. Thank you for listening to Ernest Hemingway with me. I like this essay, oral representation, whatever he wanted to call it, the art of the short story, because while all of Hemingway's books give you a real idea of what Hemingway is like, I find this just a raucous read. His absolute misogyny, his absolute commitment to being a writer, and not just being a writer the way I'm a writer, which is I write a lot of things. Am I a compulsive writer? Absolutely. But also that he is so enamored with and unnerved by writers, clearly threatened in some way by writers, but also really earnest, not to play on words, and wanting to help, right? Like he wants you to understand his world. He's trying so hard here for you to see what he sees when he writes these things. And I think that's awesome and a little sad, but of a time when, that whole writers are writers and men are men and women are women and all of those things are important for whatever reason. I have always loved Hemingway because his economy of words, his complete honesty, his brevity, his concision is fun to read. And just as he said, if you tell the whole thing, if you explain everything, if you never leave anything out, there's nothing to go back and reread. I know it all already. Maybe that's why I will always reread Hemingway. Thank you so much for joining me today. Backspace, essays on everything. with me, Michelle Kennedy, will continue next week.